Welcome back to the Emma International Deep Dive podcast, where we explore the quality, regulatory, and compliance challenges shaping the life sciences industry. I'm Eric, joined by my co host, Sarah. Today, we also have a special guest, Dr. Maya Patel, a CAPA and quality systems specialist with extensive experience helping life sciences organizations strengthen investigations and develop sustainable corrective actions.
Welcome, Maya. We're excited to have you join us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. CAPA affects nearly every part of a quality system, so I'm looking forward to discussing what makes the process effective and where organizations commonly run into trouble.
Today, we're talking about corrective and preventive action, better known as CAPA. More specifically, we're discussing why corrective actions fail and what organizations can do to build CAPA programs that produce sustainable results.
CAPA is one of the most important elements of a quality management system, but it is also one of the areas where organizations consistently struggle. A CAPA might look complete on paper, but if the issue returns 6 months later, was the action actually effective?
That is the key question. Closing a CAPA does not necessarily mean the problem has been solved. A successful CAPA should address the true root cause, reduce the risk of recurrence, and demonstrate through objective evidence that the actions were effective. If an organization is focused primarily on closing the record by a deadline, it may miss the entire purpose of the process.
Let's start with the most common issue. Why do corrective actions fail?
There are several reasons, but one of the biggest is weak root cause analysis. Organizations often identify the immediate problem instead of determining why the problem was able to occur. For example, if an employee did not follow a procedure, the conclusion might be operator error, followed by retraining. But that does not explain why the employee made the error. Was the procedure unclear? Was the training ineffective? Was the process overly complicated? Was the employee expected to complete the task under unrealistic time pressure? Were the proper tools available? Until those questions are answered, the organization may only be treating the symptom.
Retraining seems to be one of the most common corrective actions.
It is, and retraining can be appropriate when a genuine knowledge gap exists. The problem is when it becomes the default response to every deviation. If multiple trained employees are making the same mistake, additional training may not solve the issue. The process, procedure, equipment, system design, or working environment may be contributing to the failure.
So, if the root cause says human error, the investigation probably needs to go further.
Yes, human error describes what happened, but it rarely explains why it happened. A strong investigation examines the conditions that made the error possible. Organizations should look at process design, documentation, workload, supervision, equipment, environmental factors, system controls, and previous occurrences.
Another area that creates confusion is the difference between a correction and a corrective action. Can you explain that distinction?
A correction addresses the immediate issue. A corrective action addresses the cause of the issue to prevent it from happening again. For example, imagine that a batch record contains an incorrect entry. Correcting that entry is a correction. Determining why the incorrect entry occurred and improving the process to prevent recurrence is the corrective action. Both may be necessary, but they serve different purposes.
That distinction is important because organizations sometimes complete the correction and believe the CAPA is finished.
Right. Fixing the individual record, repairing the equipment, or replacing a defective component may resolve the immediate situation. However, if the underlying weakness remains, the same issue can happen again. A strong CAPA system clearly separates containment, correction, corrective action, and preventive action so that every part of the response is understood.
Does every deviation or quality event require a formal CAPA?
No. If every issue automatically becomes a CAPA, the system can become overwhelmed, and higher risk problems may not receive the attention they deserve. Organizations should use a documented, risk-based process to determine when a CAPA is appropriate. Factors may include the severity of the issue, the potential impact on product quality or patient safety, whether the problem has occurred before, the likelihood of recurrence, and whether the event indicates a broader system failure.
So, CAPA should not be used as a catch-all for every quality event.
Correct. Some events can be managed through immediate correction or another quality process. Formal CAPA should be reserved for issues that require structured investigation and systemic action. That said, organizations also need to avoid the opposite problem, which is failing to open a CAPA when a recurring or significant issue clearly requires one.
What does an effective root cause analysis look like?
It begins with a clear problem statement. The organization needs to define what happened, where and when it happened, how the problem was detected, and what the potential impact may be. The problem statement should remain factual. It should not assume the cause before the investigation begins. From there, the investigation team can use tools such as the 5 whys, a fishbone diagram, fault tree analysis, process mapping, or failure mode and effects analysis. The tool should match the complexity of the issue. A simple event may not require an extensive analysis, while a recurring or high-risk failure may require a deeper cross-functional investigation.
How important is it to involve people outside the quality department?
It is critical. Quality can facilitate the CAPA process, but the people who understand the affected process should be involved in the investigation. That may include representatives from manufacturing, engineering, validation, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, laboratory operations, IT, supply chain, or other relevant functions. Cross-functional input can help uncover factors that may not be visible to one department alone.
It also helps create ownership. CAPA should not feel like something the quality department imposes on everyone else.
Absolutely. CAPA is an organizational responsibility. When process owners participate in the investigation and help develop the solution, they are more likely to understand the reasoning behind the actions and support their successful implementation.
Once the root cause has been identified, how should organizations select the right corrective action?
The corrective action should have a direct, logical connection to the verified root cause. If the root cause is an unclear procedure, the action might involve redesigning the procedure, simplifying the instructions, adding visual aids, or improving the document review process. If the root cause is an equipment design issue, revising a procedure may not be enough. The solution may require an engineering control, equipment modification, automation, or an additional safeguard.
This is where the hierarchy of controls can be helpful. A stronger control removes or reduces the opportunity for an error, instead of relying entirely on someone remembering not to make it.
That is an important point. Administrative controls, including procedures and training, have value, but they are often less reliable than technical or engineering controls. Whenever possible, organizations should consider whether the process can be redesigned to prevent the failure, detect it earlier, or make the correct action easier to perform.
What should a CAPA action plan include?
At a minimum, each action should have a clearly defined deliverable, an assigned owner, a realistic due date, required resources, any necessary interim controls, a method for documenting completion, and a defined effectiveness check. The organization should also consider whether the proposed change could introduce new risks elsewhere in the process.
CAPA extensions are another common challenge. What usually causes CAPAs to remain open past their due dates?
Sometimes the problem is poor planning. The organization assigns a due date before it understands the complexity of the investigation or the resources required. In other cases, too many CAPAs are opened, ownership is unclear, or the responsible employees do not have enough time to complete the work. A due date should reflect the level of risk and the work that actually needs to be completed. High-risk issues may require immediate containment, but the long-term corrective action still needs to be realistic and properly managed.
An extension is not automatically a compliance failure, but repeated extensions can signal a larger problem.
Yes, if extensions are necessary, they should be justified, documented, risk assessed, and approved according to the organization's procedure. However, if CAPAs are repeatedly extended, management should examine whether the organization has sufficient resources, effective governance, and realistic expectations.
Let's talk about effectiveness checks. This is often where a CAPA either proves its value or falls apart.
An effectiveness check should answer a simple question: did the corrective action solve the problem without creating a new one? The mistake organizations make is defining effectiveness as completion. Updating a procedure or completing training proves that the action was implemented. It does not prove that the action worked.
What would a stronger effectiveness check look like?
It should include measurable acceptance criteria, an appropriate review period, and reliable data. For example, if the CAPA addresses recurring documentation errors, the effectiveness check might review a defined number of records over a specific period. The organization could establish an acceptable error rate and confirm that no similar deviations occurred. If the CAPA addresses equipment failures, the organization might review maintenance records, downtime, alarms, or performance data after the corrective action is implemented.
So the criteria should be defined before the CAPA is closed.
Yes, the organization should decide how effectiveness will be measured while developing the action plan. Waiting until the end can result in vague criteria or a check that does not generate meaningful evidence.
What happens if the effectiveness check fails?
The organization needs to evaluate why it failed. The original root cause may have been incorrect, the corrective action may have been inadequate, implementation may have been incomplete, or another contributing cause may have been missed. A failed effectiveness check should not simply be repeated until the desired result appears. It should trigger additional investigation and appropriate action.
Sometimes quality events are reviewed individually, and each one appears minor. But when the data is viewed together, a pattern becomes obvious. How important is trending within a CAPA program?
Trending is essential. A strong quality system does not evaluate events only in isolation. It examines deviations, complaints, audit findings, nonconformances, out of specification results, maintenance records, and other quality data for recurring patterns. The same issue may be described differently across several records, so organizations need consistent categorization and careful review.
This is also where good data governance matters. If event descriptions and root cause categories are inconsistent, identifying trends becomes much more difficult.
Correct. Reliable trending depends on reliable data. Standardized categories, accurate records, defined review frequencies, and meaningful metrics help organizations identify emerging risks before they become significant failures.
What role should senior leadership play in CAPA?
Leadership sets the priorities and provides the resources necessary for the CAPA system to work. If employees are pressured to close CAPAs quickly without conducting complete investigations, the organization may create the appearance of compliance without achieving sustainable improvement. Leadership should review CAPA metrics, overdue actions, repeat events, effectiveness check failures, resource constraints, and systemic trends during management review.
What metrics are actually useful?
Organizations may track the number of open and overdue CAPAs, average investigation completion time, the frequency and justification of extensions, recurring root causes, effectiveness check success rates, the age of open actions, and CAPAs linked to audit or inspection findings. However, metrics need context. A low number of CAPAs does not always indicate a healthy quality system. It could also suggest underreporting or an overly restrictive CAPA process.
If you were reviewing an organization's CAPA program, what red flags would stand out?
I would look for repeated use of human error as the root cause, excessive reliance on retraining, overdue CAPAs without adequate justification, weak problem statements, and effectiveness checks that only confirm document completion. I would also look for recurring deviations that are not connected, CAPAs that remain open because ownership is unclear, and actions that do not address the identified cause. Another major red flag is when employees cannot explain how the CAPA process works or what their responsibilities are.
What about CAPAs opened in response to audit or inspection findings?
Those should receive careful attention. Regulators and auditors may evaluate whether the organization addressed the specific observation as well as the broader systemic issue. Responding only to the example identified during the inspection may not be sufficient. The organization should determine whether the same weakness exists in other products, processes, departments, facilities, or systems.
For an organization that wants to improve its CAPA program, where should it begin?
I would recommend starting with 5 areas. First, evaluate the CAPA procedure, make sure responsibilities, escalation criteria, investigation expectations, extension requirements, and effectiveness checks are clearly defined. Second, review open and recently closed CAPAs. Look for overdue actions, recurring issues, weak root causes, and corrective actions that rely too heavily on retraining. Third, improve investigation skills. Employees should understand how to develop problem statements, gather evidence, distinguish causes from symptoms, and use root cause analysis tools appropriately. Fourth, strengthen governance. CAPAs should be reviewed regularly by process owners, quality leadership, and senior management. Finally, use trending and effectiveness data to drive continuous improvement.
Would you also recommend periodically reviewing closed CAPAs?
Definitely. A retrospective review can reveal whether issues returned after the formal effectiveness check was completed. It can also help the organization identify common weaknesses across investigations, such as incomplete impact assessments, repeated extensions, or actions that failed to create lasting improvement.
Before we wrap up, Maya, what is the one thing you would like listeners to remember about CAPA?
CAPA should not be treated as an administrative exercise. It is a structured problem solving process designed to protect product quality, patient safety, and the integrity of the quality system. A CAPA is only successful when the organization understands the problem, identifies the true cause, implements an appropriate solution, and confirms through evidence that the solution worked.
My takeaway is that closing the record is not the same as solving the problem. Organizations need to measure success by whether the issue was sustainably addressed.
Effective CAPA programs require more than a good procedure. They depend on thoughtful investigations, cross-functional participation, reliable data, clear ownership, and support from leadership. Maya, thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you.
And thank you to everyone listening. If your organization is struggling with recurring deviations, overdue corrective actions, ineffective root cause investigations, or CAPA remediation, Emma International can help you assess your current system and develop a more effective, sustainable approach.
Visit minternational.com to learn more about our quality and compliance consulting services. Be sure to subscribe to the Emma International Deep Dive podcast so you do not miss our upcoming episodes.
We'll see you next time.